Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. I got a good one for you today. Sat down with a new friend, Jaia McClure. You can find Jaia at JAIAMARA. That's JaiaMara.com or on social media by the same name. Had a great conversation, so I hope you enjoy that. As always, if you want to contact me to either be on the show or to send me recommendations for folks to be on the show or to schedule spiritual direction, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. Thanks for all the support and the love. Keep liking and sharing and supporting and all that good stuff, and we'll keep it going. And I hope you enjoy. All right, so we're rolling. Jaia McClure, welcome. Good to meet you. Thanks for, like I said, taking a chance on someone you don't know and coming and have a conversation with me and journeying with me. Why don't you start by just giving folks a little bit of an idea of who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, yeah. Thank you also for taking a chance with me, right? You never know what you're going to get. This is a wild card.
I guess that's right.
Yep. Jaia McClure, what am I about? I have been a yoga teacher for 27 years. I've been a Reiki master teacher for about 25. I've guided meditation. I facilitate retreats, sacred space. I would consider myself a ceremonialist or like a ritualist, someone who offers and teaches ritual craft, ways for people to dive into the sacred outside of the mundane. All of those things are my passions. And recently, within the last 4 years, I was employed. Like I get to clock in and do that job as well, which is amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. I've always sort of like done this work sort of like grassroots, just, putting myself out there. But
Clients and
yeah. And I still do that. I still have an individual sort of personal practice and offering, but to be able to do the work and to have like a corporation or a company see it as valid was really amazing.
That is awesome. Beautiful. And so you're from East Tennessee, family, just background like that?
Yeah, yeah. My daddy is from deep Appalachia. We like to, Coker Creek, Turtletown, those places, if you're familiar.
I know Coker Creek.
Yeah, half of his siblings were born on a porch there,
cool.
And then they moved to Maryville. My mama is from Atlanta, so I have family there too. I was born in Atlanta, but we moved here when I was 2, so I'm definitely from here.
Yeah.
I like to say I'm a daughter of Appalachia.
Yeah.
I like to I feel the mountains as sort of like my great mother, my granddad.
Mountains call, don't they? For
Yeah.
sure. Cool. All right. Well, why don't we, so just as a way, as you know, or as listeners know, I sort of try to just walk through people's, what I call spiritual timeline. And so when you think about that huge broad word, spirituality, whatever that means to us, where do you enter into that in your life? Is that childhood? Is that, what does that look like?
Yeah, great question. I've been thinking about this since you sort of asked me a couple of days ago, and I think, some of my earliest memories are being in yoga posture in my living room, which is not anything I would have ever been introduced to by my parents or my family. Nobody's really like mystical in that way.
When you say yoga posture, what do you mean?
Yeah, just like sitting in the floor watching TV cartoons with my sister and doing these crazy positions with my body.
Okay.
And like having never seen them before or understood that. Wow. Which, like I personally do believe in sort of past lives and reincarnation and imprints. And so that's where I put that in my timeline. I also have always been so dreamy. I've always been super mystical. Like even as a little girl, my imagination was unreal, and that's been the richest part of my experience in this human form, is diving into things that are unseen or unknown or unproven. So I would say from childhood on, and then, like I said, I stepped into my first yoga class maybe when I was 19 years old and never looked back.
Okay. So in terms of like family life growing up, like did you grow up in like a religious household? Like what was there a sense or a concept of higher power, God, whatever. What did that look like? Prayer life.
Right. Yeah. So to this day, my mom still says the blessing over dinner, maybe not breakfast or lunch, and she doesn't go to church at all. Never really has.
Okay.
But I grew up through grade school and high school going to Baptist churches with friends.
Okay.
And I went every Sunday because I loved the depth of experience I would feel in the crowd. It wasn't necessarily the message, because there's so many mixed signals for me and my experience in church.
Sure.
That I'm hearing on one hand, like your heavenly Father is this divine love, but if you don't please him, you're going to go to hell forever.
Yeah, those messages get mixed, don't they?
Right. And I'm like, I can't buy it. Like I just don't. That's not my experience of God.
Yeah.
And so I remember this very clearly, and I think we would call it an ego death now if we were looking back. But when I first was like, no, I'm rejecting that. I'm finally rejecting this idea of a wrathful God. I had to sort of sit with myself, and because it's very scary to risk a damnation for questioning, and I just kept feeling this divine guidance that's like, no, you're on the right path, keep going, just trust me, and it was sort of like a releasing the reins and trusting that the horses were going to drive themselves for a minute.
Yeah, that's it saddens me, and I know like listeners have heard me say this a million times, but it saddens me because that is such a common story. Not all of it, but just that experience of organized religion in this area, that a lot of people who come through the doors of my church come with an immense amount of spiritual religious baggage because of those mixed messages.
Yeah, it's such a trauma. And so I vowed that, number one, my children would never do that. They would never be experiencing that. They would never think their spirit was dirty, because gosh, it just hurts me. And then along the way, I think my first non-Christian book that I read was The Tao of Pooh, and that unlocked a lot for me. And then I met a group of pagans, and that was really fun. Okay. So that was this experience for a couple of years where I went deep into like the goddess, and I was introduced to this divine idea that the feminine could be beautiful and not dirty.
Now, how old were you about when that happened?
I would say right 18, right after I graduated high school. Okay. That was sort of like my 19 year was like this grand, like I'm cutting away all of this old stuff and I'm going to explore what's new. So
to dig just a little bit into like the internal part of that. So you're growing up in that sort of organized religion of the Baptist church. You've got this piece that you're talking about that's sort of just with you already, that past life connection or whatever that might be. So internally, spiritually, what did that look like? Did you connect to that Judeo-Christian Baptist God in your life? Like, was there a prayer life, or was that just already those mixed messages such a conflict that even as a child you sort of...
I did pray. I think I pray to this day, like with every breath I take, right? But as a little girl, as a teenager, as someone who sinned often, because the teenage years are very exciting, I felt like I wasn't worthy. I wasn't allowed to talk to God, and yet I did it anyway because there's some sort of like rebellious spirit in me that's like,
That's awesome. So
you can't take that away from me.
And did the unworthiness come through the religious teaching?
Yeah, through that, like, you're a sinner. And
you can't even approach God.
Right, because if you're knowingly sinning, like if you're going to pick up that beer and drink it, if you're going to have that thought, if you're going to have that lust, then, and you're doing it when you're doing it, because I was always very conscious, then there's the guilt of doing it alongside of like, but I love you, God.
Yeah. Man, again, I'm repeating myself, but it's like, so I grew up in the Episcopal context, and it just like blows my... I didn't grow up with any of that. And it just blows my mind, so that trauma, that tension that people carry just because of the upbringing they were, born into. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool. So anything you would name there in terms of like spiritual experiences in childhood up to... Because then I'm going to dig into paganism there.
Right,
so like,
that's fun.
Like anything there in like childhood or like adolescence that you would name of... spirituality?
I would say, when I was in the church, I sort of did make it my own experience because, again, like I had the one thread that the church was telling me, like, you're not worthy. And then the other one where I'm like, I'm absolutely in love with this God, with this Christ.
And isn't that what the church is supposed to be doing?
Right. And so I would be in church and sitting beside all the kids I'd partied with the night before, right? And just like crying in rapture and in love for the divine message. Yeah. So.
Okay, so we could go so long down that just because it bothers me. But so paganism. So what is this, like Wicca? Is this like, what is this?
Yeah, Wicca Light is what I would call it. I never like joined Wicca, but what really resonated for me in paganism is this like, well, the earth is changing, the seasons are changing, the trees are doing something different, and we're celebrating that. There's a ritual for that. There's a storyline, there's a pie for that, like everything. It just inundated every part of life. Like I can put on this specific color and I feel connected to Goddess, or I can wear this specific crystal and I can feel connected to this energy. And I was like, oh, this is what I want. I want this spiritual practice that is everywhere for me, not just like Sunday morning and Wednesday night.
Yeah, I feel like that's there's such a misconception of, these words, paganism or Wicca or whatever, especially like in the Southern Christian world. They carry a lot of things with them. Yeah, and a lot of judgments, a lot of misconceptions. Yeah. And when really it is sort of, as you described, it's really just such a beautiful, it's spirituality in nature. It's grounding you and connecting you to nature, which we should be always. Yeah. Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it gets all these bad sort of connotations with it.
I agree. And we so with my children, something that's really interesting about the Christmas season is that our families, mine and my husband's and my children's, like extended family, my parents, my husband's parents, everybody celebrates like Christmas, right? So we made sure on solstice or Yule to share the pagan roots of this holiday. And I don't want to scare anyone, but so we would call it right. We would call it the Yule tree, and we would turn off all the lights and all electricity and all TVs, and we would just spend time together. We'd have candlelight, living room, and nothing lit but the tree. And I would tell the pagan story about why the tree is important, why gift giving is important, why this spirit of generosity, which is sort of how we related Santa Claus to my kids, because due to my extreme level of mysticism and what I love about folklore, I didn't want them to be so harmed or hurt or sad when they found out that Santa.
Right. Shocker, everyone.
I'm not outing anyone. So what we said is like Santa is the embodiment of the spirit of generosity, and that's why he gifts us these things. And then how can we in turn be generous to others? How can we give back? How can we pour it up the line or down the line?
That's awesome. Yeah. Then it's not such a like, are you good or are you bad?
I hate that storyline.
I know. It's such this would be a complete sort of tangent, but it's interesting to like, so that's the same theme as what we were naming earlier in terms of like the religious upbringing. And it's like, is that just human nature to do that,
Do we need to feel like we have to repent some bad doing?
Yeah. Because if you just look through church history, even I often feel like, I guess we're going to go down this tangent, but like, Jesus comes and is railing against essentially that.
Exactly.
In the temple, in the priests, in the Pharisees, sort of deconstructs all that and says, no, you're loved. Like, God is love. You're loved, connecting to nature. He's got all that stuff going on. And then what does the church do but take that beautiful message and return it to the same thing?
Right. Well, I mean, like, was it the Romans that, like, first of all took him out and then rewrote his words, or put words around his words that made sure that people were controlled by this, like, you're good or you're bad. Yeah, it's so sad. Again, can't really go there, but it's like, what is it inside us as human, as these creatures that needs that judgment, or is it the control, or is it it's very strange. Is it duality,
like,
right?
Like somehow we can't believe, maybe that's it, we can't believe that that something could actually love us that much.
Oh, yeah.
And that freely.
Yeah, but we turn around and look at our children and, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm not going to do anything but love that. Yeah. The pagan roots really, I feel like, were the way that I sort of could. So I had done this, raised in the church, felt injury by the church, sort of put those storylines down for a minute, but held on to Christ, in this beauty as a light.
Yeah.
And then actually through paganism came back around. And I was like, Jesus actually was such a pagan and an anarchist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I have a very similar story. People have heard me say before that if it weren't for Buddhism, I probably wouldn't be Christian. Like I found I was able to discover a new pair of lenses to go back and relook at Christianity and Jesus and go, oh,
it's so beautiful.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And from that pagan timeline, I because yoga was already a physical posture practice for me, I very easily and naturally flowed into, I wouldn't say that I am Hindu. I don't feel right saying that, but my spiritual practice for the past now maybe 20 years has definitely been in devotion of Shiva and Shakti, and it's incredibly beautiful because that also feels really pagan, right? I mean, they also follow the moon cycles, and
There's of course, the whole Hinduism is almost an insult, that word, because what we're naming there is such this massive, broad thing that it's almost offensive to put a word on it. It's so huge, but I totally get what you're saying. There's a lot of similarities between what you're naming in paganism and what we would call Hinduism. Yeah, certainly. What can you tell folks? So you said devotion to Shiva and
Shakti.
So tell folks, like, what does that mean for you? What does that look like?
This one's long.
Yeah.
So
I'm in for the ride.
Right. So the pantheon of Hinduism you're right, is this container that I feel hardly, it's busting at the seams. My lineage actually traces into the practices from Tantra. And just for the listeners, Tantra is not what Westerners think it is, right?
Yoga isn't either.
Right? That's exactly right. Yeah, we're out here trying to spread the good word. So Tantra is actually a set of practices, of spiritual practices that are kind of if you were looking at it from a Christian lens, you would see it as sort of purification processes of the body, spirit, mind, and heart. Tantra really means expansion, this like, how can I again see the divine, see the sacred in every single cell, in every atom of this planet, in everything we're doing? Where is consciousness and how can I connect to it through my own practice, because I am a vehicle of consciousness. Yeah. So my practices then move sort of beyond Hinduism or through Hinduism into this practice of Tantra. And Shiva and Shakti have a lot, first of all, like folklore or lore around Devi and Deva, which is goddess and god. Like the stories change, right? Depending on like what area you're looking at on the map, or like where this lineage came from, or what word this person used when they taught their disciples. So Shiva and Shakti have personification. There's, statues or pictures or stories about their origins and about their energy and what they offer us in devotion. But there's also this idea, and this is the idea I like to connect to, is that Shiva, in and of itself, is the grid work or the pattern or the ground that holds energy to build physical manifestation. And so to say that another way, Shiva is consciousness. It's just pure consciousness. And I like to relate that back to Christ consciousness, because at the origin of the origin, at the center of the center, it's all the same.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the logos. That's, right. Before, in the beginning was the word, right? That's right. Yeah, the fabric of all of creation.
That's exactly right. And so that's sort of how we see Shiva. And then Shakti, which is, Shiva and Shakti are one, but we have to view them as duality because that's who we are as physical beings. Shakti then is the pure power and the raw energy that activates consciousness into being manifested. So when these two ideas or these two energies come together, which they are always together, dancing what we would call the Leela, the play, the divine play of being a being in this world.
Yeah.
And so that story, I relate to that story of creation. I relate to those energies and those faces, right? In Sanskrit, we would call it your Ishtadevata, which is the picture you see of the divine when you close your eyes to pray.
That's beautiful.
It is. And for me, that's just pure light, right? So for me, that is Shiva, Shakti. And then I get to play with Shakti at her highest point is just raw energy, so light. But if I want to connect to a part of myself that is fierce because I'm going through a hard time and I need my fierceness, then I connect to Shakti as Durga. Who rides a lion and carries 10, weapons on her 10 arms. Or if I need to connect with a part of myself that is the loving, devoted wife and mother, then I connect to Parvati. But if I look upstream from all of these different faces, I'm connecting to light. I'm connecting to consciousness.
Right. I mean, this is the saints. This is connecting to Mother Mary in circumstances. This is connecting to Saint Francis, and
Yeah.
I mean, I hope that's okay with me saying that.
I love it.
I love the. I mean, you don't know this about me, but my before priesthood, world religion major, like total just seeker, I think, and so I've always had this passion. I don't know. I mean, at some point very early, I noticed that when you peel away. And Hinduism, quote unquote, has this too. There is a religious structure to it. There are human imposed rules and things like that too, just like Christianity, just like any religion that we know of, at least in my experience. If you start to peel away those kind of human things, for lack of a better word, there's a thread that is discovered. Yeah. Which is what I feel like you are talking about, that thread, which I can retranslate and show, and you've done it already here today a little bit, show in Christianity, show in Judaism, show in all of these traditions. Yeah. I call it the mystic thread, But
I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When I teach this, right, I have a course that I teach once a year called The Pathway, and it's an 8-month course. We get together once a month for 2 hours, and when I teach this, we talk about it as archetypes, right? This is the divine mother archetype. This is the divine feminine warrior archetype. This is the divine father archetype. This is, and then we can go to any of these religious pantheons and say, here's what it looks like here. Here's the picture of this person here. But for me, with Tantra, what we find is that we're connecting to the energy, and the name is cool. Like, we all need a name because we're humans and we have dual nature. But those names help us connect personally, then give us that personal practice and connection.
Sure. Yeah, I hear a lot of, from my perspective, like we call it the cosmic Christ, right? The divine spark and everyone. And it's just, I know we're playing around this theme a lot, or at least I'm getting obsessed with it today. But like it's a frustration I have in the religious structure in which I live and work, where somehow, I don't know, probably unfairly, I blame Paul a lot, that that sort of Greco-Roman influence of, we get obsessed with thinking that, body, soul, separate, you die, you go to some separate place, and that then prevents us from doing a lot of what you're talking about, like connecting to source, spirit, God, in everything, right here and now, tapping into that Christ consciousness. Yeah.
I think that's what Tantra gives us, really, is this permission to, or these methodologies, and that's what Tantra really is here's this spiritual practice, here's this methodology, here's this way that you could do this. And it does get dogmatic, as everything does, because the human spirit needs to rule something. But I think through the methodology, we're being more and more is being revealed to us, pulling back the veil, as you said kind of earlier. And there's a neat thing that happens in Tantra, these two terms, Tirodhana, and Anugraha. And Tirodhana is what happens when the divine spark or Shakti or this brilliance, this divine grace that we experience veils itself from us. It's a sort of, we could consider it like shadow time, right? I call it shadow walking when I'm in this Tirodhana space where I don't feel grace, where I do feel disconnected from Shakti or disconnected from my own inner divinity. And I'm aware of it very, very quickly. I'm like, well, who turned off the lights?
Yeah.
You know? but the experience has happened enough, and it's going to happen throughout the rest of everyone's lifeline, that I can now just dive back into my practices. I can just be in devotional space, even in shadow.
Yeah.
I can be like, this is divine shadow. I'm learning a lesson right now.
Yeah. Now, would you say, it was interesting, the word choice there, you said that the divinity, to use a term, pulls back. Is it the divinity that pulls back, or is it us?
It's us,
Okay. Yeah.
but we are divine.
Yes, sure,
right?
sure.
So in my practice, I am Shakti, right? But Anugraha is this time when we are in grace, and we're just like, and it's so clear when it happens because you're like, oh, I feel home, I feel right, I feel aligned, I feel connected. And I'm plugged in, and those are times of immense, not only growth, but I find, here's the crazy thing about the ego, and I found this in my own storyline several times until I'm like, oh, the ego.
Yeah.
I'm in grace, everything's working out, like I'm unlocking just crazy secrets, like I'm in it. And then I'm like, ooh, I'm in it. And then boom, Tirodhana again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dang.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I feel like I'm just retranslating things over and over again today, but it's just so awesome how that's so much of what I counsel with people in their spiritual lives, right? Like, no, God didn't go anywhere. You have, probably because of ego or whatever circumstances, you have sort of pulled back or disconnected, right? God's still there, right? And then sort of that whole idea of, the moment we think we've got it, it's gone. And then I also heard in that sort of, it's uncomfortable, we don't like to talk about it, but it's because we don't want to think of divinity this way. But that shadow time is necessary for, like, the desert, the wilderness, the struggle and suffering sometimes are necessary to continue that growth.
Yeah. I like to call it the aggregate that polishes my shine. I got to bump up against something rough or I'm not going to get shinier.
That's a great image.
Yeah, like a polishing.
Okay, so like timeline, I'm just having fun talking, so
I love it.
Went on a deep dive there,
going.
But so in terms of timeline, so like graduating school, you got the pagan influence, you're carrying with you this almost natural, just inherent in you connection to what will eventually be yoga. Where do you go after the pagan experiences after high school?
Well, I had a bunch of babies, so I think I like to joke that I was covered in like breast milk and slobber for like 6 years. And so my spirit, it was still spiritual, right? It was still beautiful. I'm just celebrating the divine in this tiny little chubby, slobbery, snotty thing.
Yeah.
And creating sacred practices for them, because I don't know how long I've got them. I don't know how long they're going to stay with me on this path. So I was just saying this story the other day around Yule, around the holiday season, we would, because I was a stay-at-home mom, so I never saw another human being really. And there's a funny story about how I connected with the Jehovah's Witnesses in there, but we'll hold that one. Because they came to my house once a week. They were my friends.
Yeah. I've gotten in trouble for doing the same thing.
I was like, you guys are also on the outskirts of society. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We would go out during Yule and we would collect anything that was still green, right? So from the herb garden, there would be rosemary and or lavender and even oregano at my house stays alive because it's like a 20-year-old oregano. And then we would walk around the neighborhood. We'd collect pine boughs. Anything that was green, we would collect and bring back to the house, and then we would craft wreaths for the house. every year after Yule, after Christmas, when we have a live tree, we always burn the tree. And so our ritual is the tree holds our wishes, our dreams, our hopes. And then also in that tree, we can put anything we want to release from the year prior. And then like it always ends up being January 6th, we burn it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's such a ritual for us. But we cut the bottom edge of the tree off. So we have this little trunk, and that's our Yule log, and we save it. It sits by the fireplace every year until the next year, and then we burn that on solstice.
Do you know that, like, the church does everything you just
Oh, yeah.
named?
Really?
And most people just have zero idea that it's connected.
It's pagan.
Like,
Yeah.
Epiphany is January 6th, and you
wow.
have a tree burning.
I didn't even know that.
I grew up eating Yule log, like,
Cake.
desserts.
Yeah. Nice. That's amazing.
It's nice, amazing, and awesome, but it's sad that we delete or become unaware of the deep connection.
Yeah, because I think like the controlling part of the church, because I'm not trying to vilify the church at all. There's beauty, so much beauty here. But in order to control the pagans, they had to say, no, we killed your gods, and now we have an Easter bunny.
And we're going to take your practices and put different words around it.
Right, and then we're going to tell people that it's a sin to believe the old ways, even though there's still the new ways.
Yeah, I mean, it makes some people uncomfortable, but even like I said, the dates. I mean, Jesus was not born on December 25th.
Right.
Yeah, resurrection didn't happen on these are based on solstice and on
on spring equinox. This was what one of my favorite rituals that we did recreate for the kids was around Easter, because the goddess herself of spring, her name is Esther, right? And we call that holy day Astara. And so Easter is a very clear match to these words. And I mean, the fact that we're using eggs as symbols of fertility. So when Esther visited our home for Easter morning, the kids would get Easter baskets, but they were full of seeds and gardening tools and dirt. I gave the kids bags of soil, and on that day we would go out and plant seeds.
Yeah.
We would, to celebrate that connection to the planet is waking up.
Yeah.
Everything's being reborn right now, not just consciousness through Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like I don't mind the renaming of things, but let's not lose that beautiful lesson, which I would call. How is that not Christian?
Right. How is it not? How does it disconnect us from this beautiful idea of the rebirth of consciousness or Christ? Yeah. So those years, to tie back in, I'm raising babies. We're trying to create really sweet little spiritual rituals for them. My yoga practice is growing and growing, and I start to become very aware that, I mean, in a very short period of time, like, oh, this practice is not just a physical posture practice. I am missing everything.
Right.
You know,
like in today's world, people see it as exercise.
Yeah.
Which, yes, but it's from something much, much deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we, to share with the listeners, because I'm trying to spread this message wide and clear. Yoga is an 8-limbed path that is set to become these practices that, again, cleanse or polish our soul and spirit, our heart and mind, our physical bodies. And so asana practice, which is the physical, quote unquote, exercise practice that people call yoga, is like step 3. It's not even step 1 or 2.
Right.
The first step is the yamas and the niyamas, which are these sort of practices and awarenesses and observances, kind of like the 10 Commandments, but different. And that's the first step to getting yourself right to prepare for the next step, and then so we have dhyanam, which is a meditation practice. We have asana practice, which is the physical body care. We have pratyahara, which is withdrawing all the senses so that we can just tune back in to what I like to call the bindu of our being. And bindu means like the center, but it's the center of the center. And the bindu inside or within us is sort of what I also think of as the still point. Right, it's the place where nothing moves, but everything is observed. And so that's where we're truly in our Chit Ananda Maya Kosha, which is pure consciousness of our being. And when we're there, when I'm really solidly centered in my center, I am one with every other living, beating heart on this planet. And that thread of consciousness, what did you call it? Thread of mystical thread?
Yeah, the mystic thread.
Yeah, the mystic thread. That's where we all connect in. And as a healer, as someone who practices Reiki and does these energy work practices to help lift every single one of us, you know, I am lifted when you are. She is lifted when I am. If I can get into that Chittananda Maya Kosha and I can really resonate there for a minute, then I can just pour love back into the web so that anybody who needs it can pull it, even if they don't know me. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Does it drive you absolutely nuts to see like health club? What was the other image I had? Just the yoga, the way we see it today.
It hurts because the beautiful and amazing culture and the people that this gift that the West has been given, that culture is just being kind of trampled. You know, we're not. By not sharing mantra and mudra and pranayama, mantra is chanting, mudra is shapes that we make with our hands or bodies, and pranayama is breath work or just that connection into getting quiet. By not sharing this part of the practice, first of all, the people of the West are missing it. You know, I mean, like, and you hear these amazing success stories where people are like, ooh, I found yoga, it changed my life. You found asana practice, it did change your life. Imagine what you could do with the other 7 limbs of this beautiful practice. And so when that became very apparent to me, I think one of my first books on yoga was by Paramahasana Yogananda and the autobiography of a yogi, which I think if anybody's interested in this practice, they should read it. It's such a beautiful story. But to give it back to South Asian people, right? Like for lack of a better term, and we might delete this one later or not, white people are ruining yoga. Yeah. You know, and it does break my heart. And I sit here as a white person, you know, and so part of my seva or part of my service to this beautiful practice is to help without shaming, to help people recognize that there's so much more, that there's so much richness in this practice. And when I found it, you know, my babies were little, we were coming through, I had nothing but time to read and read and read. And I was like, oh, mantra, you know, like just the practice of chanting or reciting these beautiful Sanskrit words. It changes me more than asana practice on a mat.
Yeah. Another crazy example of what we're talking about is like Om, right? We see that everywhere. People, you know, you go into stores and you see posters of it and you see stickers of people and no one has any idea what that is. Right?
It's true. It's true. Like, in the beginning, there was the word.
Exactly.
And the word was Om.
Exactly. It's the like, I mean, you correct me if I'm misstating this, but like my understanding of it is basically that. It is like the original or core or like the vibration of the universe, right?
Yeah. You could relate it to the layperson as like, just as white light contains all color, Om contains all sound, you know? And so that vibration, that frequency, because I'm also a sound healer, right? I also perform sound baths, like no less than 6 a week, but probably more like 8 or 10, which is a lot of time to be spending with pure, beautiful, sacred frequency, right?
I gotta do that. I've never done that.
I think there's going to be one in Lenore City. I know there's going to be one December 17th at the new Yoga Mix that my home studio and Amanda Hatcher, my friend, opened. It's just in its first couple of weeks. I'm not trying to plug it, but I know I'm doing a sound bath there on December 17th. There's only 20 spaces and it'll sell out within 12 hours because they always do. But I'll do them again and again. I'm also happy to do sound bath anywhere. So
awesome.
Om is and sound and vibration and frequency. You know this because you studied world religion, but almost every religious text starts with, and then there was sound.
Yeah, that is right. Yeah. Gosh, I had another tangent to go on, but I lost it.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it will. I got it. So when you were talking about like Westerners and what we're doing with yoga and whatever, I don't know. It occurred to me like, do we think that's actually a culture or societal thing, or do we think like even in India, there's people, or in South Asia, right? There's people who are probably treating yoga the same, are probably doing similar things, right? Like the image that came to my mind was I'll never forget, young, learning about Eastern religions, totally like enamored with and fascinated by like Zen Buddhism and like monastic living and all this stuff. And then my professor gave this like paper, or gave this, I can't remember what it was, but basically the point was how Buddhism in the East has gotten so much a part of the culture and the society, and has gotten lost in the same way that we're talking about. So that now it's like, if a man wants to become a businessman, right, he has to go through monastic life to get there. And so the heart isn't in it, it's just what you do. And like then when technology has come on the scene, like the teachers walking around smacking the guys because they're in meditation, quote unquote, but they're actually on their cell phones
doing business.
Yeah, right. And so it's just, I don't know, I guess the point I'm making is like it's again that point of like somehow this is a human thing that we do.
Yeah. Well, I so many things for me to share there. Because I said this already, Western culture and not to round it out to white people, but that's really what it is, are ruining yoga, because what happens is everything that happens in the West goes back to its source place in the East, right? McDonald's in Hong Kong, So West influences East, even though East influenced West first. And so what we're doing is we're taking this deeply rich, old, about 10,000, 15,000 year old practice that, of course, changed and formed in those 10 or 15,000 years. But, things that formed in the Himalayas are pretty much the way they were when they formed,
Yeah.
And so now we have the West changing yoga, and then that goes back to the East and informs the East. And that's how we're injuring it. That's truly where injury occurs, is that for the World Peace Yoga Studio that I studied at in Rishikesh, right? The teacher there, Swami Vishnu, he's such a beautiful embodiment of like this yoga or this tantric or yogic spiritual practice that came from the Himalayas, and then and he drives a Range Rover, right? Why wouldn't he? But through Rishikesh, but we're changing it, and if we don't get on board, if the West doesn't get on board with understanding that there's more to yoga than what there is, yoga will be forever changed. And
I've never thought of that before. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, so my work is to listen to the South Asians. Like, South Asians are my teachers, I'm a teacher here, but I want to take people from here back to India so they can hear it from the source. And protect the source, give money to the source, give service, give dedication and devotion to the source, so that we keep the source pure. I know everything in this culture changes, and to answer your question, it's capitalism, right? Lululemon can charge $120 for yoga leggings, but in the East, we have people who've worn the same cotton loose pants, right, for the 20 years that are teaching what actual yoga is. It's not necessary to spend that much money on yoga leggings or a yoga mat. You can go to a river, sit on the dirt, practice meditation for an hour, and you're doing yoga. So it's this message. It's this sharing of like, you have permission to step out of the capitalist yoga practice and deep dive into this beautiful spiritual richness. And I have Lululemon yoga leggings, just so that listeners know that I'm aware.
Yeah. They feel good. No.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so you named going to study, right? So okay, so motherhood, family, you're diving into, and you're finding your practice. Sounds like there, and then what?
As my children are aging, there's more space for me to dive even deeper, right? My eldest daughter is 26. She moved out of the house probably when she was in college. She went to UT. She studied abroad in Dublin. A room became available in my home for me to dedicate and devote to my spiritual practice. And everything changed. It got so much deeper. Because when I'm in downward facing dog, my toddler's not crawling over my body anymore. Right? So like as I'm moving my children into citizenship, right, and into the world, I'm moving back into the deepest depths of my experience, depths I had never imagined being able to reach.
Yeah.
And so my meditation practice was daily, right? Instead of like, whenever I got 2 hours away from the kids. And the beautiful thing about Tantra is they do say it's a familial practice. Like it's a practice that you can do with your kids crawling all over you.
Yeah.
So I have space in my room. I call it the temple, right? Where my devis or my statues of the divine are. I have altars everywhere. In this one little room, there's something like I counted the other day, 10 altars. To whatever embodiment of Shakti or Shiva I need to connect to. I can just turn to the east, and I've got Durga, and I've got my altar that is fierce, and my prayers that I say in this direction are like to connect to my inner warrior. Or I have Shiva, which is, in my mind, embodies Christ consciousness. You know, this just beautiful light that's in my life. I like to say I married Shiva on the Ganga when I was in Varanasi, which the West calls Varanasi. And he came to me. Like I just kind of had this, like Shiva just walked right to me from the sunrise on the Ganga that morning. And he walked right up to me and I was like, oh. And this is me in devotion and spiritual practice and deep meditation. And he walked right up to me and I was like, okay, I'm yours, you know? And so elements of that come back to my home, and I'm always connected. Even in Tiradana, I can walk into the room and I can at least see it, and I'm like, I know you're there. Yeah. I'm coming. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, it strikes me that I don't know. I guess I think about listeners, and I think about people who have never studied or looked into world religions and have never even been exposed to a lot of things that you're covering today. And like, it strikes me that probably a heretical example of a Christian, doctrine or concept, but I think it holds true really, that the same way that we in Christianity talk about the Trinity. To say it in sort of a funny way, I always try to tell people like Hinduism and the way that you're talking about relating to these aspects or these Shiva, these would you say deities? Would you say what?
You could say Deva.
Okay.
That's the same word, source.
Exactly, right? So that's my point though, is that just like we treat the Trinity, we say that these are three, but they're God. It's God.
Right.
It's the same thing. I always say in a funny way, like the Hinduism, there's like 360 and growing, right? And faces of God. I just say it's the Trinity on steroids, right? Like it's the same. It's really the same concept, because if you dig down into the theology of Hinduism, those are all God.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
all Brahma. It's all,
Yes.
I don't know if that's even the right word, Brahma, but
yeah,
that was my understanding. That
I
Brahma
can touch
is like
that.
God,
Yeah, I could touch that. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva are the three main like heads, right. of God. But then if you pass those three, if you go beyond it, the source story is sound, literally. Narayana is the first, and we can come to this story also through through Christ consciousness in the story that comes from the Nag Hammadi library, and I'm not sure if you know that one. Okay. So the Pistis Sophia, what happens is consciousness is nothing but light. This is the first origin. There's nothing but light, there's just consciousness. But then consciousness had a desire, and that desire, that first desire, was for consciousness to experience itself, and that was duality, right? So if we're talking Christianity, then there's the consciousness is God, and God wanting to experience itself split that consciousness into Christ consciousness and the Pistis Sophia, which is the movement of energy, aka Shakti.
Yeah.
Right? So it's exactly the same source story.
Yeah, it's also very similar to just Genesis in Adam and Eve.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva all began with sound, just like the beginning of Genesis.
Right.
And but what I love, and I think the reason Hinduism really hooked me in the beginning, is because if we are all divine and created in his image, and I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of women, the goddess element, she wasn't named goddess, right? But the Mary, Mother of Christ, as well as the Magdalene, those were the closest things to the divine feminine that we got from the Bible.
Yeah.
And I love Devi. I love Shakti. Like, I feel so connected because I'm a female. So I need that image. I want that image. I desire that image to be able to see myself as divine.
Yeah.
And that was ripped away from us by the Romans.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's we could deep dive, into, yes, 100%. I mean, in Hebrew, just even the various names for God, half of them are feminine,
Right.
And it's, yeah, totally. There's a beautiful image a guest the other day gave, you just reminded me of talking about childbirth, being in labor, and just a deep need to connect with and call on Mary in that moment. I sort of hear that there,
Yeah. Well, in the Tantra, the reason that Westerners believe Tantra is a sexual amalgamation of spirituality, and it's not that, but it's definitely not that.
Yeah.
Is that the things that they saw before we had computers and the internet, back 10,000 years ago in the middle of anywhere, when sex occurred, birth occurred, and life occurred. And so still from this practice, we are exalting, sorry to get this way, but penises and vaginas as sacred, because life comes from this.
Right, sure.
And so when I was in India just in February, we went further up the Ganga. I just try to always follow the Ganga source.
No, Ganga is
the river, the sacred, the Ganges.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. When the waters go down, the Shiva Lingam appears, because there's these statues that they've built kind of lower down on the banks of the Ganga that represent the linga is the penis and the yoni is the vagina. And when the Ganga goes down, it's revealed, and it's like, oh, life comes from this, life comes from this, life comes from this.
Yeah.
So it's sacred. And wherever along the line we were taught shame about these things is such a sad thing, because we witness life coming from the female body. Yeah. What could be more sacred?
Shame, and then also just and this gets ruined, saying, I'm sorry, I'm doing this all day.
I love that
I'm
you're
just,
doing it. I love it.
Religious syncretism here, but it's so much the same in Christianity. It gets translated into purity teaching. But that's not the message. The message is the sacredness of sexuality, of creation, right? But that all gets turned into shame, right? And then purity rings and whatever, and people lose the whole point. It's just about good and bad,
right?
And then also people rebel against it, and what we see in today's world with technology and everything else, it's also just completely. What is casual, that's also a perversion, right? Because it's still not respecting the sacredness of this act, right?
Well, we could turn anything in this world into a perversion. We could turn anything in this world into something sacred, right? Like it just depends on which heart and which mind is coming to the thing.
Intention is so much.
Right,
everything.
absolutely. And it's true that sex could become a very low vibrational, addictive, like we could get lost in that. We can get lost in coffee.
Yeah.
We could get lost in fried food. We could get lost in Lululemon leggings.
Right.
Or we can come to it and see it for what it is, which is what it can be. It doesn't have to be sacred for everybody, right? Some people don't need that, but it could be.
We can live awake or asleep. We can live conscious or unconscious in every
Exactly.
moment.
Yeah,
right?
we could be lost or found.
The image I use way too much is like, so I think about this often, and this may be a segue into, because you said something really interesting to me about how important ritual is for you. And again, I don't know how much you know about the Episcopal Church, but like everything is ritual. Everything has meaning behind it. And so communion, so the Eucharist, I think about this all the time. It's this ceremony, this ritual we do again and again and again, and people, you can go up to the altar rail and receive the body and the blood, and that can be absolutely nothing in that moment, or it can completely transform you. And it all is, and that is dependent upon you,
what you're bringing,
being centered, you being intentional,
yeah, I love it. And again, that's why we go to ritual, right? That's why we go to these practices, is because Jaia, need a moment to step outside of driving my car in holiday traffic, sitting in line at Starbucks for 35 minutes to get a coffee that I need to wake my brain up. And I am no longer using Starbucks, just for other reasons, but that's the relatable story, right?
Yeah.
I need to find this moment inside the moment. And I could sit in this line in my car at Starbucks and chant, which is what I did, right? It's what I do. Trying to make if I'm standing in line at Target, checking out for holiday shopping, which I also don't participate in, I can just be in my breath work and I'm doing yoga, right? And what I mean by I'm doing yoga is I'm practicing something sacred, because that's what yoga is, right? I'm connecting to something more. I'm connecting to the moment inside the moment.
And I think, back to that mystic thread, at the core of all these practices in the world, that's it. They're all trying to get to that, and they're all trying to, there's all these traditions that in various ways are trying to teach us and help us as best as we can to live in that space.
Yeah.
Right? And I just think that's so awesome, and it's sad because it's always so missed, right? And I always love to tell people, it's like, Christians pray, quote unquote, but it's such a genie in the bottle relationship with this thing we call God that's a dude with a beard and clouds and far away from us. But when you look at like when Jesus was saying, Jesus goes to the desert and prays for 40 days, he's doing what you're talking about. He's not out there talking for 40 days without ceasing.
Right.
He's going into center. He's connecting with the desert. He's connecting with, yeah.
Is there a more pagan thing?
Well,
right. But that's also the story of Siddhartha, right? Because you said you deep dived into Zen Buddhism, and I wanted to connect these two things, and then we'll get to your next question. But Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and Tantra all meet at the source waters that, like, from before.
Yes.
And so they all are the same practice with different names and different locations and different regions. The gods loosely look different,
Yeah.
But I did just sign up for a teaching that's happening this coming Saturday. I can share this with you later, but it's called Christ's Lost Years in India, and it's the 20.
That's insane. I literally was about to just say, sorry to my parishioners who listen to this that your priest is saying this, but there is a theory which is very interesting that, because the law, we don't have
20 years of his life.
Right. We have the Christ child, and then we have Jesus comes back and begins ministry, and particularly in like Nag Hammadi and Gospel of Thomas and these sort of so-called Gnostic texts, they all sort of get lumped into Gnosticism, which I do not think is accurate.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
there's a theory that he went to India
Yeah.
and learned. Yeah.
So there's an hour-and-a-half podcast coming up. Or I don't know if it's a podcast. It might be a Zoom meeting, but I've signed up for it, and it's at like 1:00 next Saturday. I'll let you know. We'll circle back around.
Cool. Yeah. That's so funny.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool.
Yeah. I just can't believe we both had that right there.
We did.
That's great. Where were we going? I don't know. So ritual. So in terms of timeline though, it sounds like, to bring us almost up to here, unless we're missing a big gap, you just really then, after kids are grown up, is it safe to say you just continued on that path of study, growth in your practice, and that brought you to then teaching, leading, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think part of my archetype, the archetype of who I am, is definitely a teacher. I'm such a teacher.
Yeah.
I can like read something and then I love giving it.
Yeah.
I just want to give it to as many people as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And the pathway course, I think, was born of this little thing called a pandemic happened. And so I studied deeply on Zoom with my tantric teacher from India, with I'm a dancer also, and my Guruji in Indian dance. I studied with her. She's a Rajasthani. She teaches Kabelia. She's like amazing. We'll talk about that later. I took a deep dive into Tantra, mm-hmm. and I was able to really connect into the dedication and the devotion of the practice. I was reading something like 10 books at a time. I was looking back over my Instagram and had taken this picture like studying.
Wow.
And there's like these 10 books, and all of them are on the Tantra,
uh-huh.
and Tantra support, right? And one of the authors, Harish Johari, who is no longer with us, his daughter is my Guruji, and her name is Seema. And so Seema Ji is continuing the Johari House, the school that her father started around Tantra. They live in Hardwar. That's where the Johari House is. I'm leading a retreat with her this coming October, taking the people back to the source. Mm. And I think that really, I'm also alongside this deep study of Tantra during the pandemic, teaching this course, this pathway course. And the course covers archetypical practice. Like, you can come to this course if you're not interested in Tantra. You're going to get a lot of it. Yeah. But Tantra is just consciousness, right? Spread out. I'm teaching energetic anatomy from a yogic perspective. Because remember, like, I'm Reiki master of like 25 years, but I'm not Japanese. And those symbols and that practice is so very beautiful, and some people really get it. My Reiki practice is Karuna Holy Fire Reiki, which is a lot more yogic. And so yoga gives us this beautiful awareness around the energy bodies, the way energy moves through our bodies, the way we can heal via energy medicine. And so the pathway course really, really touches extensively on the energetic anatomy from a yogic perspective, because yoga gives us all of it.
Yeah.
Like, we have chakras. We have, in yoga, the meridians are called nadis, which are channels or pathways of light or energy. We have subtle bodies. We have energy bodies, which some people would imagine is an aura. Right? So there's all these different ways we can still connect in through yoga to the healing of our physical body, and therefore our spiritual body as well.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about Reiki, because I have probably too much to go into today, but like, I have a history with Reiki as well. So I'm curious, like, what your understanding and experience of that is.
Yeah. So we are beings that are physical bodies that is comprised of energy, right? Energy holds atoms together, and molecules together, and energy causes our hearts to beat. So Reiki is a kind of healing practice where a practitioner uses their hands to get a sense of energetic properties of the recipient, where energy pockets might be, where as people who live a life in this world, we become very imbalanced, and that's not hard to imagine. And energetically, we can find rebalancing by connecting with Reiki. The practitioner has symbols that I like to say, and when I mean has symbols, they're given to a practitioner when the practitioner starts to practice. And those symbols become like antennas that connect us to the specific energies that those symbols connect us to. And that sounds kind of funny. It sounds mystical for sure. It is. But I like to think of Reiki as sort of smoothing out the wrinkles of sheets.
Yeah.
Right? We could work through the chakra system. I think in this day and age, most people have at least heard that word chakra.
Yeah.
Those are energy centers in our bodies that, again, govern different frequencies of energy. You know, the heart obviously would govern love, but your solar plexus might govern your willpower, you know. And we become imbalanced. And typically, it's easy to see where, I don't like to engender this at all, but people who are hard workers, who are the breadwinners, people who put in the hours in their work are almost always imbalanced in their third chakra, their manipura, because that's the assertiveness, willpower, direction, energy. I also typically find a lot of like deficit in people who have to do that kind of work. I find a deficit around the heart center because it's hard to drive, direct, do, go, assert, and be in your heart. It's beautiful when it happens. But energy, Reiki just helps sort of rebalance energies in the body.
Yeah. And I guess part of what I'm sitting here trying to be sensitive to, like, because you and I both have this background of experience with this thing we're talking about, and I don't know where listeners are, so they might be like, what are these two people talking about? But, like, I guess I'm sort of curious so Reiki comes out of Japan, right? Is there not equivalent, but is there something in India or in your background, sort of from a yoga, tantric, whatever perspective? Is there
I would say, I bet every culture has a form of energetic healing.
Yeah.
Through yoga, through tantra, we use different words for the same thing, right? Like Reiki is, what Reiki means, that word, is life force energy,
right.
Essentially. The energy that animates our physical bodies. So in yoga, we call it prana, right? In Chinese medicine, we call it qi. Even the Cherokee, like I have this cool book that sort of maps energy centers in a body per each of these different cultures, and even the Cherokee Indians had an energetic mapping of the body. So yes, there is, and that's how I connect into Karuna Holy Fire Reiki a little bit more smoothly than I do the original Reiki system, which is called Yasui Reiki, and that's just the person's name who sort of discovered these symbols.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I sort of, I don't know if this is just Brett and like sort of the rebellious part of me, but like in my experience, I mean, just very quick, like I was introduced just through a friend's mother, pretty young to Reiki, and just had that experience. I never like became I just practiced it myself. I didn't ever like do this with other people or anything like this, but so just very basic. But I found myself, I think maybe it's sort of similar to a lot of what we've talked about today, of this like thread I'm talking about, where I found myself, because I come from just whatever, an instinctual understanding of like, okay, this is all the same stuff. Therefore, I found myself wanting to buck the dogma, if you will, of it, the rules of it.
Yeah.
So like, okay, this is life source. So who are you to tell me that I have to hold my hands in a certain way, or lay a certain way, or concentrate on certain symbols? Does that make sense?
It does.
And so I totally just was like, why can't I just call this meditation? And I'm connecting to my own energy and the energy of the world and God, if you will, right? Why can't I just call this prayer?
Yes, I totally agree. I 100% agree. So I think the place where we have to be careful is that people, just like with yoga, with Reiki, because it's a Japanese system, there's a little pushback now that's growing. Like, if you don't understand this, the sort of like the Japanese terminologies or the symbols to this practice, who are you to do it?
Right.
Right. So what we say in culture is an energy worker does Reiki, because Reiki is the most commonly understood term.
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tell people I'm an energy worker, if I say Reiki, they know exactly what I'm. Usually, they more are likely to know what I'm talking about. I don't actually call what I do Reiki anymore. I just sort of use that as a palatable term for society.
Yeah.
My work is called integrative energy medicine or integrative energy work, because in a session with me, I might use tuning forks because I'm connected in through sound. I might use crystals. I might use singing bowls. I might use Reiki. And so, to answer what you're saying, yes, absolutely, you can connect to it without symbols, without a term, without a piece of paper that's a certificate.
Yeah.
Right? Certifications are funky for me because, like, who's benefiting from the certification? Like, which organization is ran by what kind of people? Like, if I'm certifying myself in Reiki specifically, the trademark goes to a guy named no. Oh, I can't remember his name right now. I buck up against this guy a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give my money to that guy. I want to send it back to Japan if I'm practicing Reiki. Like, I want to serve the culture it came from.
Yeah.
And in yoga specifically, and especially through Tantra, there's absolutely energy work. Yoga postures are energy work. We're aligning the body in a funny shape so that energy can flow through the nadis or the energy channels of our body in an efficient way. That's what we're doing. Mudra work, if I'm holding shapes with my hands, is specifically touching certain energy channels so that I can bring that energy back internally. Mantra, the power of the voice, and you know this through your practice, the power of the voice and what we say with the voice invokes the thing we're saying. So mantra work is energy work, because if I go back to the idea of Shakti is energy that is abundant everywhere. I want to touch Shakti as much as I can, so I'm going to chant these words while I'm holding this posture, while I'm doing this mudra, while I'm wearing these beads. I want to really, really enrich that experience, and I can bring in these external tools to help my consciousness remember.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I call those tools.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, like, spiritual disciplines, prayer practices, I would say, are doing the same thing.
Exactly.
It just, I don't have my words today, but it just, and I hope this doesn't come off like I'm watering things down in like an offensive way, but I just really, for me, Brett, I do not identify with God as like this being somewhere in the sky. I identify, if you push me and you say, what is God? I identify much more with that concept being the thing we're talking about. This life force energy, this, right? And so therefore, I mean, I just think we can tap into that anytime we want, and there are all these traditions and tools and practices that help us do that. I mean, I think in Christianity, in some ways, that's what when people talk about the Holy Spirit, that's what we're talking about. It's very interesting for me because, and so you can do that through these symbols, you can do that through these, whatever it is, holding our hands a certain way. You said it in a really helpful way, that it helps us remember, right? There are tools that help us remember how to tap into that.
Yeah.
And so, like, prayer, even though that's a huge, big, broad term, that really can be the same thing. So to give a concrete example, kind of concrete, it's really fascinating to me, and again, if people have never done Reiki, they may not identify with this, but I know, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening who, if we were to push them, if they were to talk about a spiritual experience and we were to push them about how they felt in that experience, they would name some of the same characteristics. So physically, when this person would do Reiki with me, I had physical sensations, heat, right, warmth, tingling, and it's amazing to me because when I am preparing to do the Eucharist, now this isn't to a lot of what we've been talking about today. If I'm not in the right frame of mind, if I'm not intentional, if I'm not centered, this doesn't happen. But if I'm really on or really in that place, in that zone, and I'm doing the Eucharist, and when I lift my hands in doing these actions, I feel that exact same thing as I felt in Reiki.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're just interacting with, in my terminology, Shakti. Shakti is energy that is everywhere at all time, no matter what. And here's my favorite description of Shakti. Shakti is the breath that I take and the lungs that breathe it. Shakti is the forest fire that rages out of control and the rain that quenches it. Shakti is the gravity that holds molecules to each other so that we can become living beings, and Shakti is the consciousness that embodies that. It's not, you can't look anywhere and not find it. And that is the same as God, right?
In the Gospel of Thomas says, turn a stone and I am there, break, split wood and I am there.
I love the Gospel of Thomas. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Other than the really Harry Potter-ish parts of like Jesus like striking things dead and raising them as a child. It's very interesting. One of my favorite teachings that you just reminded me of is like Yahweh. I'll show you this later. I have this in my office. It's a picture of lungs and it has Yahweh on it. But so those letters, people just think that that is how the Hebrew people express to this idea of God, but there are these consonants, there's no vowels, and so the teaching goes that the proper way to pronounce Yahweh, the proper way to therefore pronounce the true name of God is breath.
It's breath. Yes. It's so true in so many other cultures. Like that's what we would say, aham, right? Or even amen. Right? Any of these ways that we're speaking with breath, we're connecting to life. And life is that which animates this physical body. That's God.
That's awesome. I'm worried about your time today.
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So one place I really wanted to hear you speak a little about, because you said it in the beginning, maybe this is what we were referring to, is around ritual.
Yes, that was it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like just because you sparked something for me when you said like, I forgot how you said it, but how important ritual is to you, or how much work you do around ritual. And I just think that would be really fascinating for me and for listeners, especially if they're involved with me in my religious life, because as I named for you, the Episcopal Church is ritual. So
yes.
It'd be a cool lens. So talk more about that.
My ritual practice is funny because it is influenced by every spiritual seeking or meandering I've done along the way. So when I set an altar, and I've already mentioned that I have so many, like I'll make an altar anywhere I go. If I go to the river to meditate for a day, I've taken at least some gemstones. I'll gather leaves, rocks, anything I can, put it together and make an intentional space.
And why is ritual important to you?
Ritual is the idea that I am sanctifying anything to give myself an opportunity to take pause. Or to discover the moment in the moment, or time beyond time, or spirit within that space, wherever that is.
Yeah.
So for me, ritual, it's important to create sacred space, because that's the first step in saying this is different or this is special.
Right. Ritual is marking, setting aside, sanctifying, right?
Yes. I still set an altar in a very pagan way for me, and what that means is it's important to have a representation of the masculine and the feminine, and then in those two representations to see the non-duality of it, to see the oneness, to see consciousness, to see God, spirit, whatever you call it. But I look around and I see men and women, right? I see gradations in between the binary of masculine and the binary of feminine. I see anything in between. And so does nature. Nature absolutely expresses itself in this way. There's no binary in nature. And so on my altar, to see the sacred, to start to begin to experience myself as the divine, I want mirrors, I want reminders, I want things that say this is different. And so I have those two sides. I have the space in the middle for non-duality, I'm a big crystal person, so for me, gemstones carry a lot of energy and help hold energy, so I'll set that. And then I call in spirit, or often I do elements, because I think if this planet and all the things that it encompasses were created divinely, then one of the easiest ways to connect in is through the elements: earth, water, fire. So to connect in through these elements, earth, water, fire, air, they're the building blocks of life. That's what we learned in science. So I love calling them forth. Yeah. I like having them represented on the altar space. I love having a candle, a stick of incense, a gemstone and crystal, or a little bowl of water. Like, it to me reminds me that my soul, my spirit chose to come back to this planet to play and to experience life in its purest form, which is the elements, which is nature. And so those things, it's important for me to have those things present in my sacred space, in my altar space. And then, like I've mentioned, I have in India, we call them murti, M-U-R-T-I, which are the statues or the representations of Shiva, of Durga, of Saraswati. But what's alternative to what people might believe, those statues aren't gods. Right? Yeah. Shiva isn't even a god per se from a Christian viewpoint. Shiva is a representation of that specific energy or consciousness that I carry. Yeah. So it's a mirror. Right. It's a reminder. And I love seeing those images outside of myself, because my practice is that I begin to merge with them and remember who I am. And that's what ritual is. It's a remembering.
I love, what it makes me think about, well, a bunch of things, but it saddens me because I see more and more and more that a ritual is disappearing, even just simple things like journey to adulthood, whether that be, becoming a man, becoming a woman, right? These things, we're losing our connection to those, and they're becoming less and less, or they're becoming more and more surface level, kind of. Yeah. So I see that part of it, but also it almost feels like I want to say demystify, and yet at the same time, the point is like everything is mystical, like everything is spiritual.
That's right.
But everything you just said, right, about your personal ritual space. The reason that works is because those are images. I'm sort of just reframing what you said in my own words, right? It's not that like Brett needs to, or any listener needs to like go and pull in the elements or have an altar. But those are the things that are meaningful to you, and you spoke about that, right? But that's the key, right? It's pulling whatever it is that's meaningful to us. It's making it our own, but it's setting the space, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
That's like the mechanics, I would say, of what's happening there.
Yeah.
Right. I would. It's like they're trigger, like incense in a worship service, right? Cues, they're sort of cues, they're triggers. It's the tradition of when people come into a worship space, at least an Episcopalian one, entering silently, and they'll kneel before the service even starts. They'll pass the font, the waters of creation, the waters of baptism, and they'll dip it, and they'll mark a cross. That is ritual to set that space, to sanctify that moment, right? And set yourself apart.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's amazing. I would say, I teach ritual craft as part of my pathway course. And we leave it very open in that way, because anybody from any pantheon, any practice, any religion, which I don't love the word, but any approach to their connection to the divine, to their Ishtadevata, right?
And it's got to be yours.
Right, it has to be yours, or you're not connecting in. That approach of just teaching ritual craft is like bring something that matters to you, whatever that is. You know, we're gonna practice altar building today. That could look like you sitting beneath a tree on top of the roots of the ground. Like, you were speaking about how different people come to it in different ways, and I was thinking people who wear a cross around their neck, right? Like just a permanent piece of jewelry that someone wears. Are you just blindly or like just disconnected, and every day when you put that on, are you just wearing it because you're just wearing it, or do you connect in? That's a ritual. Singing happy birthday and blowing out candles is a ritual, and it's a ritual that we all participate in, probably. Right? I invite people to pan out and look at the patterns of their lives and discover what rituals they already have. Coffee in the morning is probably one of the most commonly practiced rituals we have.
Right. And again, we already said this, but you can encounter the divine in your coffee if you enter into that, you know, intentionally, or you can just pass through your life unconsciously, just in the same way as you can receive Christ at the altar consciously, or it can just be bread and wine.
Right.
You know,
that's
it
right.
can be nothing.
Yeah. I say this, I lead, we have a rising ritual that we lead at work, at my job. There's a class that starts every day at 8 a.m. And whichever person who is the yoga teacher that day leads that ritual. And for me, the rising ritual is we start by steeping some tea, but we don't drink it. We practice breath work for maybe 10 minutes, just connecting into the breath of life. And then we drink the tea, but before we drink the tea, we hold the tea. We thank the tea for growing and bringing medicine to our body. We thank the soil for offering the tea its nutrients. We thank the sun for giving tea energy to give our bodies. And then we thank the tea for giving us the power as the tea moves through us to bring those blessings to others, to anyone else we encounter. Thank you, tea. That's a ritual.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's not to belabor this point, but it just makes me think of so many different examples. Like, you know, like I do spiritual. Well, I have a group of guys I meet with every week, and we do group spiritual direction. And yeah, we light a fire. And there's this book. It's awesome if anybody ever wants to look at it. It's old. It's called Gorillas of Grace, with just beautiful poetic prayers. And we light a fire. It's very simple. We light a fire, and we read one of those prayers out loud. But that is the ritual, and that sets that space. And in the same way as when I do individual spiritual direction, I talk about this with the person I'm doing, and they know. I talk about setting, and so I pray. And just basically ask it. It's a verbal ritual, right? So I just say, God, we're setting this space aside as a conversation with you, right? Mark it with your presence, right? But it's the same. It's the same mechanics. It's the same thing that's happening. Or I was thinking about this earlier in when you were talking about. I was identifying with the struggle of parenthood and spirituality, right? And how what a tough shift that was for me, because I had a very disciplined spiritual life, and then you become a parent and you're like,
Ooh.
Spirituality, what?
Chaos.
You know, I mean, it is spirituality, but it's, you know, and so I had to start to make my running, when I would go on a run, that was my prayer time. And so, as weird as that sounds, as I was like stretching and getting ready to run, I would pray and tell God, this is the time I got with you, man.
Yeah, here we are.
Or one, or whatever.
Let's do it.
You know,
Yeah.
And this is it. But it was marking that time.
Yes.
You know?
This goes back to what you mentioned earlier, which is true, which is like we in ritual are looking to mark time for deeply sacred mystical connection, but also the goal is to have sacred mystical connection in every moment.
Yes.
And there's a book called Everyday Ecstasy. It's definitely tantric. It's written by Margot Anand. And she talks about how sanctifying the act of washing dishes or making dinner or scooping your dog's poop out of your whatever it is.
Yeah.
It can be sacred, but we still need those big aha moments also.
Yes.
We need the big deep dive to nourish spirit.
Yes.
And we need the daily, mundane, mystical experience to keep spirit awake.
Yes.
And both of those are equally true.
Yes. So, pardon the nerd out here for a second, but like, so this is not taught well, and I fear it's missed on a lot of people. But in my tradition, in my setting, that is what Sunday church is. Mm-hmm. Literally. Mm-hmm. It's, and actually, if you dig into it, the language that is used is that it's not, this isn't Sunday. This is actually a separate time and space. So they even frame the idea that way, to where technically we should be understanding. No one looks at it this way. We're just going to church, right? Mm-hmm. But we should technically look at it as like, when you enter into that space, it's not Sunday anymore. Right. It's not time. You're in a separate space, and it's the big moment you're talking about. Because what happens in the Episcopal liturgy is we're reliving the entire story of Jesus, really of salvation history through God. Like, it's all told through all the elements and the sounds and the words and the actions that we do. Mm-hmm. It's all relived. Why? Because at the final moment of the service, everyone is sent out in the world. So it's exactly what you just said. It's the big moment, this big ritual moment that's set aside as sacred, that you are, I can't remember the verbiage you used, but I just remember the big moment. And then you're sent out in the hopes that that all your moments will be then that.
Yes, right? Yes. Time between time.
Yeah, exactly.
Time beyond time.
Exactly.
Somebody, this is related slightly, but different, about Reiki. Mm-hmm. I do distance Reiki. I offer distance Reiki. I have sessions with people who live in London and South Carolina and Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. With great success, right? And people ask when they're getting to know what Reiki is, like, how can you do Reiki over distance? How does that work? Yeah. And I say, energy actually doesn't understand time or space. Mm-hmm. Those are constructs that we created. Mm-hmm. So I think you touched on this also with ritual and creating sacred space or setting sacred space. God doesn't understand that this crystal is more important than this rock I just found in the soil, or that my mala that I chant on is more special than the cross that someone wears around their neck. Like, there's no understanding or differentiation. There's no duality when it comes to the divine. That's our construct. Mm-hmm. And so even though we use these tools to help us connect in, I could still enter ritual space and have none of the tools, mm-hmm. because I have cultivated a relationship with ritual space. Mm-hmm. And I have cultivated a relationship with the divine where I can just call it in. Ritual space is important, mm-hmm. because we have those big aha, time beyond time moments, but it's not required.
No, right, exactly. So I'm going to ask you my final question that I ask everybody, but I'm going to tell a story because which I don't normally do, and then you'll tell a story.
Cool.
I'm going to ask you to. But one of the craziest, most beautiful experiences I ever had, in terms of all of these things, was actually with Reiki. This was not intentional. And I guess I'm sort of thinking of people going like, what are these people talking about? Energy and blah, and like, the skeptic mind, sort of like, this is woo woo. I totally have that mind. But this moment made things super real for me, right? So had, long story short, sort of in a way, had this experience of Reiki, traditional, right? Someone laying hands, right? If I'm being skeptical, and it was intense for me. I mean, I just to describe it briefly, the first time I had that experience, felt heat all throughout my body, mm-hmm. a pressure all throughout my body, and then I remember when I opened my eyes, it almost felt like the room felt like it was far bigger than it actually was. It just was massive. I was almost shocked. I thought I was in this massive room, but when I opened my eyes, it was like, and like, oh no, we're in this tiny room. Oh yeah. So intense experience. From a skeptical mind, and I did this, I questioned all of that. And I sort of felt like, well, they told me what I would feel before I went into it, so that seed is planted in a way or whatever. I'm just, I wanted to believe that I felt these things, and I'm just like breaking all that down. Well, months, maybe even years go by. This person decided that they actually were going to end Reiki. They long other story, but in that system, right? People, the dogma of Reiki teaches that if a master like opens you to Reiki, then you're connected energetically to that master, right? So this person, now I didn't know any of this. I'm in this person's home, but I'm not with them. I didn't even know they were there. I'm with their husband and their son. We're watching a basketball game. We're just being dudes, like, whatever. And I all of a sudden got lit on fire.
Oh, wow.
Like just intense, same sensations, just on fire, pressure. It was so, not off-putting is not the right word, but I didn't understand what was going on, and it was so much so that I even stopped the conversation and asked both of the people with me, like, are you feeling this? Like, am I crazy? What's going on? And it was weird, I didn't know what to do with it. And so I ended up asking, this person, because she came down, and it turns out that's what she was doing. She was breaking.
Wow.
With none of that really matters. The point is just because you reminded me of the distance thing, and so I truly have experienced that before, and I have no explanation for it other than because there was nothing that would have planted that seed in me. There's nothing that would have given me the idea, right? So I have no way to even explain that away. Is that making sense?
It totally does.
So anyway, you can respond to that if you want, but I also wanted to say, and I think I prepared you for this a little bit. The question, sort of as an ender, I always ask people is, what is, if you can, your most intense, greatest, most significant, quote unquote, spiritual experience of your life?
There's so many.
I know.
Oh, maybe I'll link them because I find that they are linked. When I'm in meditation space, and this has been the case for as long as I can remember, often am gifted what I like to call an inner temple or an inner sanctum. And in that meditation space, I receive visions, and the visions almost always lead me to a place of deep spiritual significance or practice. So I go into meditation space. I start with breath work. I tend to journey really far. I'm one of those. And the very first one I ever received, I remember the vision led me through this really dirty, trashy, just gross inner city block. And a door lit up in front of me. I open the door, I walk inside, and I'm inside this amazingly pristine golden temple. And that was the first time that ever happened for me. And I was like, whoa, this place is crazy. And since then, I've been gifted lots of inner sanctums, so lots of temples. And so I go into the temple. When it's first introduced, I go in, I look around, I see what I'm invited to see, and then I recognize that this is a space I can go back to. So then when I go back into meditation, if I'm feeling called to that space, I'll go there. Often a new door opens, or a gift is given, or something is asked of me to donate. I'm doing so much inner work in these places. One of the most powerful visions I have ever received, I was fully awake. It felt like a dream.
Were you in prayer or meditation?
I was in prayer. I was in meditation in my little Zen room, in my little temple in my house. And the storyline, the vision itself was unbelievably rich. And when I got to the final place where I was where I was looking for this thing and I actually was gifted it, I was like, whoa. And I just kind of came out of it like Ghostbusters. 3 months later, I went on a yoga retreat to Greece. I was in Santorini, actually. This is not the vision. This is what I was actually doing. And we were walking around Santorini. There's not a lot to see. It's kind of small. We're in Ia. And this chapel, this church, which is, I think, probably Greek Orthodox, is right beside our hotel. We walked by it every day for 4 days. So finally, we're my friend who is from Athens said, let's go in here. Do you want to go in here? I was like, yeah, sure. And we walked in, And it was exactly the place I had seen
Oh, awesome.
in that vision. And this has happened to me several times since then. But this place, the first one that I linked to, it was so overpowering. I fell to my knees and I couldn't get out of the doorway. I was just like crying and just like, oh,
Now,
I'm
you mean
here.
like when you were
In the physical
okay,
space.
yeah.
I walked in, I immediately recognized
That's
it as
shocking,
this space
yeah.
from this powerful vision I had.
Yeah.
And I just was overcome with the Holy Spirit. Like,
Yeah.
I just can't say anything more than that. And interestingly,
That's great. It's a great, like, I got you.
yeah,
You know,
I'm going to give you this. This is all for you.
Well, I'm here.
Yeah.
I got you.
Here
Yeah.
it is. Side story, my people, my dad's family, they had studied through the Church of God. And in the Church of God, there's speaking in tongues that happens. Every once in a while, we go to the Church of God. I didn't go there much. I always went with my friends to Baptist churches for some reason. But in the Church of God, they jump up, they speak in tongues. This thing happens. It's always so powerful and so amazing. And when I was a little girl, it freaked me out. But in my dream, and I have a very rich dream world, I'm always fighting demons or fighting the patriarchy or like saving children from war. I really am in service always. But in my dreams, if or when demonic spirits or dark shadowy things come in, and they do a lot because I'm always fighting demons, I speak in tongues in my dreams. I have no idea what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think I'm banishing them, or at least I'm fighting for the light. And I immediately go to the tongues and I'm speaking it. Well, back to Greece in real life, when I was in that temple, I did speak in tongues, and I've never done that before.
And that was as you were like on your knees?
Yeah, just crying and just like, no.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What a great story.
I know.
Wow.
And since then, that's happened several times in India, because now I journey to India because...
With the tongues as well, or just with the...
just with having seen the vision
place?
and going to places I've seen.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's a fascinating one. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say or share? It's been a great conversation. Definitely tell people where they can find you.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You know.
Yeah. I use Instagram as my business card. I think that's what Instagram is. It's a business card. And so my Instagram handle is Jaia, JAIAMARA _Sacred Arts.
So Jaia
Mara _ Sacred Arts.
Okay.
And I don't post a lot. I just post when the divine inspiration comes. That's where I give information about when a new pathway session will start, or I'll talk about my retreat to India that's happening in October 24. I'll introduce that. I actually am also co-facilitating a retreat in Bali at the end of April. So that'll be fun.
Awesome.
And I have a website, jaiamara.com. And I think Instagram's the best place because you can talk to me there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And are there local spots where you do work or sessions here where people can also?
Yeah. I offer integrative energy work out of my home. People can connect with me through Instagram, and if they're interested in booking a session, we can do it there. Cool. I'm certainly not going to give out my address.
Yeah.
It's in Maryville, heads up. I lead public sound baths almost once a month through the Yoga Mix, which originally started in Maryville, but the new location opened just this week in Lenore City. Okay. And that's owned by Amanda Hatcher. I want to give a shout out to my Guruji, Seema Hari Om, and all the amazing work that she does. Because they offer seva in Hardwar and Rishikesh from the profits that they make from Western travelers moving over there and supporting their work. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, beautiful. Thank you so much again, Jaia, for journeying with me and being so open and vulnerable and, just exploring everything with me. It's been a joy.
It has been a joy to connect with you and to see all the places where echoes and mirrors occur in our world.
Yes. Well, all the best, and maybe we'll do it again.
I hope so.
All right. Take care.
Okay.